Tony Kinnett.
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 Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYBC.
WCYTV here on the Daily 60.
Another day, another round of massive executive orders, bills signed into law, court drama, media drama, Senate confirmation hearing circuses. Oh man, it is one seriously great day to be paying attention to American politics, the news abroad. Good evening, I'm Tony Kinnett. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast. It's good to be with you. We've got quite the show lined up for you this evening, beginning with a slew of executive orders that is driving the left bonkers. Why is it driving the left bonkers? Over the last decade, the left has encouraged, well, I should say really the last 13, 14 years, the left has encouraged the use of the executive office, the president's pen, to affect policy in the United States. Because as the United States grows increasingly divided politically, and as with the new age of technology, the new age of communication, as well as the rapidly changing global stage, the United States is finding itself on more unsure footing as far as common ground to stand on with those we disagree with. The congressional system is, let's see, what's the right word for this? About as active as a cat that's been lying dead on the road for about a week and a half. So the decrepit corpse on the side of the road that is the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate don't really pass laws anymore, don't really affect changes in the government outside of basically being miniature pundits themselves. Therefore, after President Obama got absolutely shellacked in the 2010 midterms, and Obama realized that things were not looking super great, and then following his additional midterm shellacking in 2014, Obama came to a conclusion. And the conclusion was he wasn't going to be able to pass all of the changes he wanted to see in federal government via bills passed in Congress. So he said quite famously, I've got a pen and I've got a phone and I'm going to use it. And the left absolutely shattered the norms of how the presidency is supposed to operate using the mechanisms and tools that Woodrow Wilson started putting into place and that FDR cemented into place through way too much power in the executive branch. And ever since then, government agencies have effectively made the United States a constitutional monarchy. It is realistically the way our government currently functions. And the reason I say realistically is, yes, the Constitution says that the power of the purse is with Congress and that Congress is supposed to pass laws, but federal agencies right now are what write regulations and rules. And so Donald Trump ran in 2015 into 2016 with the goal stated of draining the swamp. He got into the administration, and then the administration, these executive agency bureaucrats, fought back and tried to stick around forever. And when they tried to stick around forever and caused a massive headache for the American people through the first Trump administration, then we ended up with Biden, and it was 4 years of even worse executive overreach. Now Trump is back in the White House, and he made good on the exact same promise that Mitch McConnell made to Senator Reid back in 2013. If you choose to do this, at the time, again, as we've talked about on the show quite a lot, when Harry Reid basically created the nuclear option instead of the more traditional route of confirming judges and political nominees and just needing a majority of 51, McConnell warned him, said, you might regret this, and you might regret it a lot sooner than you think. Now Trump is back in office, and to the Obama, Biden, I have a pen and a phone model, now Trump is using the pen and using the phone and using it as fast as he can and going as far as he can with it. And it turns out that in the weird gray area of federal agencies, which were never intended to exist, according to the scope of the founding fathers in the U.S. Constitution, the executive branch now is in a position where, oh man, it really is like a constitutional monarchy. I don't like that. That's not a good way to govern, yet this is where we are until the Supreme Court makes some things pretty darn specific. Let's talk about a few of those things that Trump is bringing in that is driving the left mad. So Trump has issued an executive order that those who are nationals from other countries, they're not U.S. citizens, who have participated in pro-Hamas and pro-terror protests on campus are to be deported. And that's an excellent move. Individuals who are in this country and are not citizens and are praising the regimes of other nations that are antithetical to the United States should be deported. If they're a Chinese national praising China, deported. If they're a Venezuelan national praising Venezuela, deported. Whether they're from Turkey, Hungary, whether they're from Uzbekistan, Russia, whether they're from Israel, whether they're from Hamas, if they are here as a foreign national and they are advocating against the government of the United States, they should be deported. If you're a citizen, then freedom of speech applies. If you're just some random foreign national, you don't have freedom of speech. You don't have access to the Bill of Rights. Those are afforded to United States citizens. Donald Trump has also, of course, yesterday put forward the federal funding freeze temporarily on select federal programs from the executive branch, in which all of these basically grants annually were given out to all kinds of random programs that had nothing to do with anything decent, like giving condoms to the Gaza Strip. And Trump's administration said, we're going to put a 90-day pause on this, just like with foreign aid, and we're going to wait and we're going to see just what we're spending money on. And so then an individual inside the Trump administration, we don't know who yet, then shut down federal health portals like Medicare and caused this big panic, and representatives like AOC, and then today in Senate confirmation hearings, individuals like Elizabeth Warren got all up in a tizzy and said, Trump shut down Medicare and Medicaid. No, he didn't. And by the way, the White House made it explicitly clear, though it was frozen by a judge that, Senator Whitehouse in Rhode Island actually played a very corrupt role in appointing that particular judge. Aside from that, the particular judge that put a temporary hold on Trump's freeze on executive spending basically pushed this to Monday. The White House has clarified the order. Much to do about nothing, a very big mountain out of a molehill situation. That brings us to the illegal immigration executive orders, which are already producing campaign promise level results. So as you'll remember, during the presidential campaign, during that cycle, there was an apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado, which is where some of our listenership is, that was taken over by Venezuelan gangs. The ringleader of that Venezuelan gang that took over that apartment complex has been caught by a sweep conducted by Kristi Noem's Department of Homeland Security. So Donald Trump's move towards securing the safety of Americans is already catching the very people who were making headlines in their violent intimidation, murder, robbery, and rape of Americans. Which brings us to the Laken-Riley Act on Crime and Immigration, which states that if the police catch an illegal immigrant who is guilty of a violent crime or theft or any kind of crime that you wouldn't want somebody nearby to commit, we're not just talking a traffic violation here, then they're deported. Even if they're a migrant who's here awaiting a court date, gone. Because if you can't follow the rules, you don't need to be here. And so Trump signed that into law today as well. On the media side of things, we'll kind of dive sideways over into the money. Meta has settled with Donald Trump in the payment of $25 million in a settlement in which the Trump team sued Meta after Trump was suspended in 2021. And that entire era of social media manipulation, Mark Zuckerberg has tried to kind of wriggle in and out of it since then. It's not over. And individuals that were involved in what is a serious issue of federal corruption are likely to pay a price at some point, given the impending work of who will likely be the next Attorney General, Pam Bondi. That brings us over to Trump's offer to buy out federal worker salaries. The left is continually freaking out about this because Donald Trump does not want the massive bloat that you and I are paying for in federal agencies. For those who are sticking around to work in federal agencies, Trump is requiring them to work from their offices. No sitting at home with a special mouse you bought on Amazon that moves so it makes it look like you're online and working. No, you have to come in and work, or in fact, you're fired.
Because as everyone knows, most of the time they're not working, they're not very productive, and it's unfair to the millions of people in the United States who are in fact working hard.
Correct. That is a major issue, that individuals at the federal level are allowed to basically work from their bathrobes and slippers on my dime when they're not even doing anything effective anyway. Moving forward from there, this brings us to Trump's announcement and executive order today that the worst criminal illegal aliens, so the most violent, whom Trump says he doesn't even trust the countries where they came from to take care of these individuals, will be moved to Guantanamo Bay, which Trump is reopening for the housing of violent illegal immigrants. Check this out.
Today, I'm also signing an executive order to instruct the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security to begin preparing the 30,000-person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay. Most people don't even know about it. We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people.
Now, of course, the media is going to spin that and suggest that Trump's going to be throwing like third-grade girls in Guantanamo Bay. Again, very explicitly stated, the worst of the worst, yes, should be in special places until they are convicted. And if an illegal immigrant who no one wants to take is convicted of excessively violent crimes, I've said this before, but I mean, the death penalty does exist for a reason. But before anyone suggests that, I'm only for that kind of punishment for illegal immigrants, nonsense. I believe that an individual convicted of any kind of a capital murder or a sex crime should also get the rope because, that makes sense. So, moving forward from there, how are the Democrats responding to the slew of executive orders? They are breaking down entirely. The Democrats are completely scattered. So, not just the ones who are in power, the old guard of the Democrats are either being shuttled away in corruption scandals, like, for example, former New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez was sentenced today to 11 years in prison for corruption and bribery involving exchanges of gold bars, cash, and a luxury car for political influence. I actually got the chance to talk to some Egyptian officials who basically believed that Menendez would have asked how high anytime they suggested he jump. Egypt was very open and forthcoming about the bought and paid for Menendez. In other weirder news, Chuck Schumer, when he's not trying to blame Trump for chickens not laying enough eggs after Biden ordered the slaughter of a lot of chickens, Schumer is now telling everyone that apparently people are aroused.
People are aroused. I haven't seen people so aroused in a very, very long time. What did he say? People are aroused. I haven't seen people so aroused in a very, very long time.
Coming from the man who believed that that the I can't say that on the air. He mispronounced the word election. And my goodness, Chuck Schumer's, the Democrats are fine, sweetie. And that brings us over to the RFK Senate confirmation hearings. We're going to head over to Whitley Yates to talk just a little bit about that. Stick around. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. It's good to be joined by a friend of mine, also from the Hoosier heartland, Whitley Yates. So many places, I'm not even sure where to say you're from at this point. You've done so much crucial work around the country. What are you up to these days? Let's get that right off the bat.
What am I doing these days? I guess I am shanking liberal media, shattering propaganda posts, and consistently advocating for Americans. That's what I would say I'm doing these days.
So if you are doing this kind of strategy contributor work, which is the basic emphasis of what used to be exclusive platform individuals for different outlets, right? You'd be a CNN contributor, you'd be an MSNBC contributor, Newsmax or Fox, and they sign these exclusivity contracts with you, lock you in. Now, though, there's so much of a media free fire, just all out dodgeball match. Everyone's making the rounds, and there's so much to dive into today. And, people are going for the millennial takes because Gen Z's just not quite there yet. Have you been have you been pulled into media hits so far on the RFK Jr. confirmation hearing today?
Absolutely. So I was on this morning for an hour on News Nation, basically covering what is to be expected, what is not to be expected, some of his challenges and ways that he's going to be able to overcome. And it was very interesting watching the hearings and kind of hearing the line of, and I'm not even going to say questioning, we'll say soliloquies that have been happening.
Oh my goodness. It was like Hamlet up there talking to the skull. Senator Whitehouse. I talked about that on Newsmax today. He's up there. I am very experienced. You are going to listen. And the man just talked for 7 minutes.
Iambic pentameter. It's giving Shakespearean level.
Double Democrat trouble.
I was like, they don't have questions for this man. They just want to say how much they don't like him and how they're more qualified at this point.
What do you make of those of our individuals, our counterparts on the right and on the left? Because you have some individuals on the right that don't like RFK Jr. You have a lot of people on the left who no longer like RFK Jr. What do you make of the criticism so far? I mean, we've been asked to sum up some of the most basic opposition to him for those that don't steep in political bathwater all day.
I would say the biggest oppositions that he has is honestly his vaccine stance as well as abortion. I would say those are the two biggest issues that I've heard repeatedly, that he has basically flip-flopped not only on whether or not he is for vaccines or against vaccines, although the exact book that they are referencing saying that he's against vaccines, as he stated in the first line, he said, I'm not against vaccines. And so it's trying to decide whether they are creating RFK revisionist history, or if there is any nuance in today that sometimes big health can be bad. And I think we've all experienced that with the Fauci ouchies. And so I think there has to be a level of nuance around saying, like, yeah, I think Red 40 is bad. I don't think we should be doing this. I do think there should be more stringent tests for these vaccines, and we're not going to just steamroll stuff out. But it seems like it's all or nothing today. And I was actually very surprised by some of the Republicans that came out against him. And I'm not just saying public statements. I'm talking about PR campaigns against him. And so you kind of have to wonder, are those funded by people that are foundational to American beliefs, or is this funded by Big Pharma? And those are the questions that we have, laid upon us today when it comes to RFK.
We could talk about the lobbying efforts. And obviously, since you used to work with the Indiana GOP, I still work as an advisor to the Indiana legislature, a few other state legislatures at times on policy. We understand that the lobbying crews are experts at busting into an office, giving you a completely different set of, not even just facts, but a completely different set of claims and statements and consequences, and trying to steamroll you before you walk into committee. But I really want to hit on the lack of nuance. I usually hate the word nuance, especially in conversations about policy. It's usually used as a roadblock. Here, though, when they talked about either vaccines or abortion, we saw Kennedy answer these questions again and again and again and again. And he talked about the different kinds of vaccines. Whereas on the left side of the aisle, the suggestion that, RFK is against all vaccines, what do you mean vaccines? Are you talking about, again, a defeated or a weakened virus? Or are you talking about tampering with mRNA, which is not a vaccine? Or are we talking about inoculation? What are you describing? No one is interested. It's that, how you said, that all or nothing approach to discussing parts of policies.
That, I believe, is honestly one of the biggest issues. And when you combine that with media manipulation, what you get is saucy sound bites that are completely manufactured and incorrect. What you get is an all-out war on young people. Everyone in the Trump administration has something to do with some type of supremacy group. You get symbols that stand for Christianity are now somehow far-right nationalism. This is the issue that we have in this country. There is no nuance because for some reason, being able to look circumspectly at an issue and say, well, I like this part, but this is not good for the American people, is lost upon us. And I do think that it is negative, specifically in policy, when we have that type of perspective. But also, I think that there is a high amount of performance within our political sphere right now. And so people don't want to accept the nuance because they want to perform on these stages and in front of these cameras.
So two supports to your point. We'll kind of flip the script here instead of, just countering. First of all, would again be the Senate confirmation hearings throughout this entire process, both on the right and the left. There have been very few actual back and forth questions where there was a goal to reach dialogue. Everyone had their private little interview and meeting early on behind closed doors, or no interview at all. And then they get in front, and either from the right or the left, they say, I'm going to say some things, and then you're just going to tell me after I'm done talking if you agree with me. And I saw that from Langford on the right, whom I like. And then I saw that from Bennett on the left in Colorado, who just yelled for 7 minutes, or
All time.
Senator Whitehouse or whomever. So when I'm watching these particular Senate hearings, I am flabbergasted by how much of this is just, like you said, trying to shoot for saucy sound bites. Now, the left understands this. I was on an interview, or a debate actually, with David Pakman over on the left on C-SPAN, and he stopped his own points in the middle because he said, well, this isn't sexy, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I was like, what are you, 5? Like, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Because the truth is transformational, but they are not looking for the truth. Once again,
it takes mental effort to dig into the truth.
And I think we have to go back and figure out how we got here as a society, right? When did we start rejecting the truth and started settling for the sound bites? And why is that pervasive specifically within mainstream media? And similar to what we began this conversation discussing, is that why the democratization of media has changed? Why platform architects and podcasts such as this one have been able to permeate over mainstream media? Because we've lost this core truth, and now they're just searching for what's sexy and what'll get clicks.
I mean, we're actually just a clip today. You actually have Elizabeth Warren, who's just the queen of gaslighting. You've reached a point where the lecturing and, again, the saucy soundbite maneuver absolutely fails. Here's Senator Warren being called out by RFK for trying to, again, soundbite her way onto CNN.
I'm not going to agree to not sue drug companies or anybody.
So let's do a quick count here of how, as Secretary of HHS, if you get confirmed, you could influence every one of those lawsuits. Well, let me start the list. You could publish your anti-vaccine conspiracies, but this time on U.S. government letterhead, something a jury might be impressed by. You could appoint people to the CDC vaccine panel who share your anti-vax views and let them do your dirty work. You could tell the CDC vaccine panel to remove a particular vaccine from the vaccine schedule. You could remove vaccines from special compensation programs, which would open up manufacturers to mass torts. You could make more injuries eligible for compensation, even if there is no causal evidence. You could change vaccine court processes to make it easier to bring junk lawsuits. You could turn over FDA data to your friends at the law firm, and they could use it however it benefited them. You could change vaccine labeling. You could change vaccine information rules. You could change which claims are compensated in the vaccine injury compensation program. There's a lot of ways that you can influence those future lawsuits and pending lawsuits while you are Secretary of HHS. And I'm asking you to commit right now that you will not take a financial stake in every one of those lawsuits, so that what you do as Secretary will also benefit you financially down the line.
I'll comply with all the ethical guidelines.
That's not the question. You and I, you have said
you're asking me, Senator, you're asking me not to sue vaccine pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, you are. That's exactly what you're doing.
Look, no one should be fooled here. As Secretary of HHS, Robert Kennedy will have the power to undercut vaccines and vaccine manufacturing across our country. And for all of his talk about follow the science and his promise that he won't interfere with those of us who want to vaccinate his kids, the bottom line is the same. Kennedy can kill off access to vaccines and make millions of dollars while he does it. Kids might die, but Robert Kennedy can keep cashing in.
Senator, I support vaccines. I support the childhood schedule. I will do that. The only thing I want is good science.
I mean, Elizabeth Warren is clearly unhinged and I think probably needs to be checked. Whenever you cannot have civic discourse without being enraged, like there's no engagement without being enraged, that is a problem, especially when you're talking to someone who is or was on the exact same side as you. There was a point in time where Obama was vetting RFK and he was fine then and people did not have an issue. But now that he has been tapped for this position after Kamala lost this election, now there's all of these issues. And Elizabeth in particular has been known to put on a failing performance, whether it was when she was attempting to be Pocahontas. I don't know if you guys remember that, but we've seen her act out specifically in the Senate when it comes to people on the other side and then be silent when people on her side have done some atrocious things.
And really building on top of that, if we're talking about Warren, if we're talking about any of the performative actions of the left, then turning around and saying that anyone that doesn't agree with them, even if they are on the political left ideologically, is now evil, reminds me of a left-wing, center left-wing podcaster by the name of Shoe on Head. And she was describing that the left says they now need their own Joe Rogan. And her point was, you had your own Joe Rogan. Like, you had this. And you gave it up when you mandated that he had to basically bow down to you. It's just not working anymore. And I'm amazed that the left is continuing to self-destruct like this in real time.
I'm actually not as amazed. I think that they took for granted those that carried their water for so long and maintained their media supremacy when it came to propelling their narratives. And so now when you see people stepping back and realizing like you're too far left, you're too progressive, I mean, I said, he's not even a political commentator, but Stephen A. Smith has been right on the money. And it's just this idea of common sense. And now that common sense is now being tagged as conservative. And at this point, I'll take it because progressivism and the idea of over liberalizing everything is so detrimental to America. And we've lived through it for 4 years.
Absolutely. Whitley, unfortunately, we've just about run out of time, but we're going to have you back real soon. There is so much to dig into and so much to pick apart and not just let be all or nothing. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. All right. Well, those of you in the 93 WIBC market just joining us after the State of the State address by Governor Braun, bringing the rest of the national audience in sync with us here. Let's talk a little bit about something that I made a bit of a bet on before we got started. That would be that left-leaning media outlets like the Kinnett newspapers, the USA Today outlets, those over at CNN, MSNBC, and their affiliates downstream at CBS News, ABC News, they were not going to be able to rein it in. And by it, I mean the common sense that really should come with modern journalism, in which the valued pieces that are digested by a larger audience consist entirely of getting the facts out quickly, accurately, and then providing a series of analyses that are not offensive or overtly biased in a hidden fashion. By which I mean, you're more than welcome to be biased in your coverage, but let people know what bias there is before you get started. And the legacy media cannot fathom that these are the things that people want right now and that they're getting from independent sources after ages of a artificially set up kingdom in which they got to reign at the top and everyone else was considered lesser, and they were the purveyors and the broadcasters and the distributors of news. Everyone else was beneath them. So I made a bit of a bet before we got started with the State of the State address this evening from the governor in Indiana, Mike Braun, conservative senator from Indiana, now the governor, that there would be a news organization, whether it be the Indiana Capitol Chronicle, which is a left-wing but pretends to be nonpartisan outlet here in the state that's funded by a left-wing Swiss billionaire, or whether it's perhaps one of the other small outlets, or the USA Today's outpost here, the Indy Star. One of these organizations was going to fact check him live and show how absolutely pathetic their coverage is. And why you, as the viewer, need to understand why there is complete disarray on the left at the present time. Because if you don't really get why the left is completely losing it, A, you're not going to have as much fun over the next couple of years, which you have very much deserved. And then B, you are not going to understand what danger there is for anyone, not just the left, in completely losing touch with what it is you are here to do and who it is you are here to represent, or in my case, to broadcast to. So I'm going to go through a few key points from Governor Braun's State of the State address, and then I'm going to go through some of the embarrassingly bad fact-checking by Brittany Carloni and Kayla Dwyer of the Indianapolis Star. And for those of you that aren't in the Indianapolis market, this is extremely useful because you could take this and put it anywhere. You could put it in any red or blue state, or you could put it in any situation in which there is a person on the right side of the aisle that gives the speech or makes an address, that the fact-checkers swoop in, and they don't put context to things. They don't say, well, actually there's a lot of truth to that. They immediately say, well, hang on a second, to everything. So, Governor Braun made a statement that not everyone that he met during his trip through the 92 counties of Indiana, that during that time, not everyone had it particularly easy because prices just kept rising. So then Kayla Dwyer immediately swings in and starts saying, oh, well, in case anyone was wondering, here's what caused the inflation, which is not necessarily something that anyone was looking for, but she frames up inflation as first surged in 2021 from the effects of the pandemic, like labor shortages, supply issues, and a sudden high demand for goods. And the invasion of Ukraine exacerbated it in 2022. It's been cooling, but remains higher than pre-pandemic levels. Why does she need to go in and make a case about Indiana's Governor Braun mentioning that prices are high for a lot of Hoosiers, or prices are high for people throughout the country? Because currently, the vast majority of Americans correctly understand that it is Joe Biden's economic policies, including running the money printer around the clock long after it was even feasible for even a corporatist economic model, that exacerbated inflation through the roof. And that Biden's team, who promised it was transitory, was wrong. And Biden's economic policy, she covers her steps immediately there. Later on, Braun talks a little bit about how he's suggested reducing the income tax burden on Hoosiers. He's trying to work on basically trying to exempt tips from the income tax, trying to talk about property taxes. And then again, the fact checkers swoop in. Kayla Dwyer says, well, between 21 and 22, home prices rose on an average due to nearly 20% due to supply constraints tied to the pandemic. And she starts, again, categorizing all of these reasons why the only things we can really blame inflation on or property tax increases on are the pandemic. And that it's not actually the government spending or the government model of lots of government spending means higher taxes. No, actually, it's all due to the inflation, which is not true. It's gaslighting at the best, and it's horribly dishonest at the worst. By just citing a random statistic and saying, yes, the reason that we had to get rid of the apple orchard is because I was stung by a bee last year. And that means that the apple orchard is infested with man-eating bees. That is, of course, you can see the doctor's note where I have a bee sting. That's the kind of citation that's going on in a minute-by-minute fact check of any Republican speaking ever. And by the way, this goes on. So there's a story then that Governor Braun told about individuals in Plainfield, Indiana, who saw one homeowner saw his bill go up 32%. It went up 44% during between 2021 and 2024 in Mooresville, Indiana. Another couple in Martinsville, Indiana, their bill increased by 50%. He's basically pointed out, hey, this is a problem. These are much higher than this national inflation average. Well, wait a minute. Kayla Dwyer just told us that property tax increases were due to inflation. So how does she answer the fact that she's clearly wrong? Well, then she says, well, of course, data in my previous comments were averages. There are certainly higher spikes in some communities than others. Wait a minute. If the governor lists a series of cities that are not all clustered around, Plainfield's not right next door to Martinsville, it's not right next door to Mooresville. If he's listing cities from around the state and people who are suffering large property tax increases that are not at the rate of inflation, then your previous analysis was wrong. Of course, again, live fact checking, so we got to move right on through. So this is my personal favorite. He says, my property tax plan is built on 3 priorities, as Governor Braun. Cut property tax for Hoosier families, especially new homeowners and seniors, and then cap the annual increase to protect homeowners and farmers. And then she immediately jumps in and says, well, according to the fiscal note attached to Senate Bill 1, these measures would amount to a $1.1 billion revenue loss to local governments in 2026. Revenue loss to local governments. Governments do not make money. Governments tax money. If governments lower taxes, the government didn't lose money as though that was their money to have in the first place. This idea that the government owns you and is allowing you to keep your property and is allowing you to keep your rights is ridiculous. And those on the left that write these silly fact-checking articles that are trying to tell you this everything is totally under control and Republicans are all idiots who don't understand economics and they don't understand how inflation works, they don't understand how property taxes work, they don't understand any of this stuff. It is extremely telling to the reader. First of all, because very unlikely that any of you are actually paying for a subscription to any of these services, much less tuning into CNN. That's why they just laid off 200 people, much less checking out coverage from, say, the Washington Post or the New York Times or the LA Times or MSNBC or Vox or Bloomberg or what have you. And the reason why it is clear to you is because what they are writing is so discordant with reality, it doesn't even possibly enter into your mind as a coherent argument because it is so silly. Allow me to give you an example here. So Braun says, let me be clear, Indiana will not be a safe haven for illegal immigration. As the Trump administration begins to return illegal aliens with criminal records to their home countries, we will assist. She fact checks this by saying, Indiana already has laws on the books that prohibit local governments from labeling themselves as sanctuary cities. This note was written by Brittany Carloni. Now, why is this, relevant? Well, because according to a report from 6 days ago from Fox 59, which is an Indianapolis affiliate by Nexstar, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police is not taking part in immigration sweeps. Mayor Tucker in Fort Wayne has suggested that he's not necessarily willing to work with ICE. Apparently, an ICE operation. There are basically multiple cases in which Indiana mayors or individuals here in the state have suggested that they may not work with ICE. So by Governor Braun saying, hey, by the way, we're going to work with federal authorities on immigration, there's no need to fact check that and just saying, well, there's a law on the books already. It's a state of the state address. What are you fact checking that for? It's all narrative based. It's all narrative based. The entire mode of operation for the Democrats is that what Republicans are doing is a waste of time, that no one's asking for this, which is untrue, that what Republicans are doing are going to cause more damage, which is untrue. And then if neither of those two things work, what Republicans are doing is mean and it hurts people's feelings. And by the way, we see that a little bit later in Braun talking, again, a little bit about some of the things that he had particular success with, a couple of the things that he was looking to fix as far as some of the cultural aspects over in the state. And the fact-checking continues. And again, it's not actually fact-checking that more so discusses specific data points that Braun said that was incorrect. But it should be, I'm sorry, I'm making sure that I'm getting this right on air so that I don't get hit with a USA Today fact check article of my own tomorrow. So Braun complimented Indiana doing rather well in the reading scores compared to other states in the education statistics that were released today. And the fact check was brought forward was, well, Indiana's reading scores were a major topic when they suggested that they were going to hold back third graders. Again, it's either Republicans are doing something that's unnecessary, Republicans are doing something that isn't going to work, or, as Brittany is implying here, Republicans are mean. That's all they have. And it's not working anymore. That's the catch. We're going to talk about that when we get back. Stick around. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast. All right, now that we've talked a little bit about how the media haven't learned their lesson, we're going to talk about the Senate Democrats who have an amazing talent for self-immolation. RFK was one of the weaker targets in this Senate confirmation hearing process. He's particularly weak on some medical issues because although he has said a lot of excellent things, he's said a few things that are out there. And I've made this clear back before Trump endorsed him, back when he was the same guy. He has some really great criticisms of the way that the United States healthcare system is currently run. The same with how our food system and our approval system that comes out of the Department of Agriculture and the FDA run. And some of the things that he says are wrong. And I was hoping, foolishly, that the Senate confirmation hearings would actually see some Republicans and Democrats asking a left-leaning guy in a right administration like some questions and getting some answers and like some context. I didn't get any of that. Instead, what I got from the right is, I'm going to say 10 or 11 things that I like about you, and then you are going to say you agree. And then we'd go over to the left, and you would have like Sheldon Whitehouse literally admitting that he's not going to ask him any questions whatsoever. And I mean that literally. He's like, I'm going to talk for 7 minutes, and you're going to listen.
Yeah, I only have 5 minutes with you, and I've got a lot of experience with CMS, so you're just going to have to listen.
And then he says, and then you can submit your written response afterward. No, that's not how that works. In fact, what you're supposed to do is if you have questions beforehand, you send them to the nominee, and then they send their answers, and you're like, hey, I saw your answer here. I got a problem with this. And then there's like exchange and there's dialogue. It's interesting. The Senate confirmation hearing is for me. It's for me, the American citizen. I need to know why my senator would or would not vote for this nominee for the administration. That is the point. It's not for Senator Whitehouse, or as much as I like him, Senator Langford, or any of the senators on the right or the left to get clips for Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, wherever. That's not what it's for. That's what it's used for, though. And it's a disgrace. And speaking of disgraces, boy, do we have a lot of them, because the idiocy, the illiteracy on display in this confirmation hearing. Again, RFK is not exactly like the hardest target to hit on, and the Democrats still couldn't do it. And every hearing, there are new Democrats that somehow humiliate themselves worse than the last bunch. So remember when we were talking about Pete Hegseth, you had Gillibrand, the binder thrower, who sounded like that insane crazy kid from the Wild Thornberrys. And then you had Mazie Hirono. And then you had Jack Reed, who looked like a bullfrog and had the intelligence of one. And then now we have Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada, who doesn't know the difference between state and federal law. Oh, dear God.
With a life-threatening bleeding from an incomplete miscarriage, goes to the ER, and her doctor also determines that she needs an emergency abortion. But she's in a state where abortion is banned. You would agree also as an attorney that federal law protects her right to that emergency care, correct?
I don't know. I mean, the answer to that is I don't know. If the state bans
Well, let me ask you this as an attorney. Doesn't federal law preempt state law?
The federal Constitution does. Sometimes not every federal law preempts state laws. It could be unconstitutional.
And by the way, this is how the entire thing went. I mean, this really was. This was just how the entire nonsensical thing went. Again, there are some laws that federal law supersedes on. For example, you cannot commit murder. Even if your state doesn't have a law forbidding murder, federal law supersedes. But just because, federal law has certain things that apply in, for example, territories in Washington, D.C., that doesn't mean that they apply in a state that has different language on that. That's fourth grade level civics. I mean, literally, as an educator, I can tell you, one of the state standards in fourth grade in social studies in like 5 or 6 states in the Midwest and probably far more in the rest of the country are understanding the difference between state and federal laws. Well, then we actually had one of the greatest moments of all time. We had Bernie Sanders, who was getting all bent out of shape because, do you support these onesies or not? Like Christopher Walken on meth. Here is Bernie Sanders yelling about onesies.
The pro-vaccine, you want to ask questions. You have started a group called the Children's Health Defense. You're the originator. Right now, as I understand it, on their website, they are selling what's called onesies. These are little things, clothing for babies. One of them.
Yes, thank you. I do love that the man who's never worked a day in his life has no concept of what a onesie is. But anyway, Bernie Sanders has got to tell us about the onesies and the capitalism.
Is titled Unfaxed, Unafraid. Next one, and they're sold for $26 a piece, by the way. Next one is No Vax, No Problem. Now, you're coming before this committee and you say you're pro-vaccine. Just want to ask some questions. And yet your organization is making money selling a child's product to parents for $26, which casts fundamental doubt on the usefulness of vaccines.
The youthfulness of vaccines.
That you will, now that you are pro-vaccine, that you're going to have your organization take these products off the market?
Senator, I have no power over that organization. I'm not part of it. I resigned from the board.
Yeah, that was just a few months ago. You founded that. You certainly have power. You can make that call. Are you support?
I love that so much. So he's like, I don't control what's on the shop, and I'm not even on the board of the place. I mean, and by the way, according to the actual Internet Archive, they weren't selling those onesies while he was on the board. And he's like, do you support this organization selling onesies without socks in this economy? Fantastic. I'm just beautiful, beautiful stuff. I mean, time could tell about Senator Whitehouse giving an amazing story about what he says that the OBGYNs of Rhode Island say are late-term abortions. And then he describes something that is not at all an abortion. Like it's not.
There's been a lot of conversation about late-term abortions here, and I just want to make clear what Rhode Island OBGYN doctors describe as what is almost always happening when a late-term abortion is needed. It is a childbirth gone wrong.
Nope.
The family has painted the room. It has bought the crib, maybe even decided on the baby's name, and has gone to the hospital to welcome the new baby into their family in what is supposed to be a happy event. And then things went wrong.
Yeah, that's not true. And he, by the way, he goes on and describes, oh, it's a late-term abortion. No, it's not. It's not a late-term abortion. That is a miscarriage. If something goes wrong during the birthing of the child, that is death during childbirth. It's its own thing. It's not an abortion. Mom's not going, well, yeah, we better kill the kid. Oh, the basic understanding that you have to have on a reading comprehension level to make it into the United States Senate is so humiliating to the millions of Americans who read above a kindergarten level, who can manipulate refrigerator magnets, unlike Bernie Sanders and his onesies. It is just despicable. And yet, again, this is supposed to be impressive. They're all going to tell us all about how amazing they are with medicine, and they were voting for the dudes in the dresses, telling us that they were women. So just fantastic, fantastic stuff. I think we'll stick around for a segment of bonus tonus on the live stream. We got to say goodbye to our radio audience. Be back in just a second over on X and YouTube. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on The Daily Signal.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
All right, time for a little bit of bonus tonus here. I was expecting to get a chance to talk with an individual who has been crucial in fighting back against government tyranny this evening, David Daleiden, who, when Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of California, David Daleiden exposed, literally just recorded a video in which members associated with Planned Parenthood and other pro-abortion agencies were bidding and haggling over the prices for aborted fetus parts. So the pieces of babies to be sold. This video that was released by David Daleiden, by the way, that's a whistleblower situation because it's incredibly disgusting. So Kamala Harris went after him. And there was this major court case that has now finally been dropped. David is phenomenal. We'll try to get him on the show a little bit later. Things just didn't work out amidst some of the scheduling this evening. That brings me to where we actually move from here with the kind of the both sidesers. I've seen a good amount of crying and emotionalism, some fear mongering, one might say, from many of the fools who believe deep down in their hearts truly that what Republicans need to do is be this high moral alabaster statue of goodness. Like, just picture just in your hearts the purest form of utopian grandeur. And then the Democrats, well, I mean, you know, they're allowed to just kind of do whatever it is that's expected. And then when the Republicans come into office and they start using the same tools that were just put down by those on the left, all of a sudden the wrists start going for the pearls. The bath salts come out. It's just absolute pandemonium, bedlam, because God forbid that someone is coming in and actually issuing executive orders. And I've seen the tears, the big crocodile tears from the libertarians and some in the establishment Republican side of the aisle who are infuriated, as they are back when Trump took off. Oh, Trump's not presidential material. Oh, how could we have someone not be presidential in the office? When, meanwhile, I've been watching Republican and Democrat representatives and senators and governors and presidents for the last 40 years humiliate themselves in front of the entire country. What I have seen from President Trump, and again, those who have watched the show, those who have tuned in ever, know that I am not one that automatically just goes and said, this is really great because Donald Trump did this. I had criticisms. He was not my first choice in this particular presidential primary. And then after it was definitely going to be Trump, I, like a lot of other individuals over on the conservative right, got behind Trump. And then they indicted him, and then they shot at him. And I was very much on board because the left made it perfectly clear what they are willing to do to any kind of fundamental norms in this country. And at that point, it's a different game. And if you say it's not a different game, you're either kidding yourself, you're either accidentally stupid, or you're willingly stupid. If you think that at this point in the United States government, that the left and the right, which are operating in the gray area of federal agencies and prosecutorial discretion via the executive branch, are somehow awful because when one operates within the gray area, then the other comes into power and all of a sudden that's off limits. No, sir. Until the Supreme Court of the United States and perhaps a convention of states illustrate very clearly, or in this case, clarify these gray, murky, swampy areas that have been created out of this bastardization of regulation, really poorly written laws. We could do an entire show on poorly written laws, a whole series of poorly written laws. The 25th Amendment is one of the most horribly written amendments in any country's constitutional history. And I read the Weimar Republic amendments. The United States doesn't exactly have a history of rock-solid legislation in the 20th century when it comes to how things are written. Probably where that whole illiterate thing comes into play. And really shoddy precedent. You staple bad legislation, shoddy precedent, and a lot of chaos and confusion in a new technological and communications age where new types of markets and money exchange and communication are possible that never were before, and travel, for example. What you've created is this large blind spot that the Constitution does not overtly address. Now, if you have the same foundational principles as everyone in the room, or at least with a quorum in the room, well then, you can actually set forth some standard guidelines and rules that aren't explicitly stated in the foundational document that everyone agrees to go by. But that's not what's happened. And now this entire blind spot, gray area mass has completely ruined any status quo antebellum that people are desperately trying to return to. It's not coming back because people who are in the gray don't want to come out of the gray. I learned this when I was teaching. As far as classroom management principles were concerned, students would almost always prefer to be in a situation in which they had enough freedom to sometimes go a little over what might normally be allowed, rather than have explicitly stated rules that were not budging, that never allowed for exception, and completely crystallized everything. And now we have this with our politicians. And it's been coming for ages. If you think Trump caused this, again, either willingly stupid or accidentally stupid. This was going on for a good while before Donald Trump stepped into this position. And what needs to happen at this point are two things. Number one, there needs to be a convention of states that, well, quite honestly, revokes a couple of amendments to the United States Constitution and either rewrites them or tosses them completely. One of those being the amendment that allows the direct election of United States senators, which is absolutely pointless. So what we have are slightly bigger House of Representatives reps. As well, we need the Supreme Court to actually get their hands dirty, as Clarence Thomas wants to do, but Amy Coney Barrett and, Justice Alito are a little skittish about actually getting in and doing the tough work of being a Supreme Court justice at a pivotal moment in the history of the United States and identify in a detailed fashion what one can and cannot do from the executive office, from the executive agencies. And by the way, who is the ultimate authority that the executive agencies answer to? Because right now it's not clear. That is a problem. According to the Constitution, it's the president who has ultimate authority over the executive agencies, but the executive agencies became so big that there was some sort of authority that was kind of given over to Congress, kind of in the subpoena process and the oversight process, and also in the impeachment process, and sort of kind of in how the agencies are funded, but kind of not, because there's multiple kinds of funding. It's a mess. It shouldn't function like that. And the Supreme Court of the United States is going to have to get in there at some point and correct this, because this is not functional. What we have right now is a constitutional monarchy with a 4-year timer. And at the end of that 4-year timer, you get a new monarch who comes in, changes everything, tries to stop the person after them from doing anything, and then on their way out issues a blanket pardon to anyone they worked with that might have broken the law. That is not going to last. It's not going to last. And so the right thing to do at this present time would be to actually start solving these issues. Because I would much rather know, as someone who's paying all of these yucks, what it is they are and are not allowed to do, so that I don't have to listen to Schiff and Warren and over in the House, Nancy Mace and AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jasmine Crockett scream like a bunch of, chickens with avian bird flu over just the most nonsensical, goofy stuff that has no application at all, either to the taxpayer, to American society, hitting it from both the cultural and the economic, to the defense of this country. Like, we're not going to get real questions during Tulsi Gabbard. You know that, right? We're not going to get real questions during Kash Patel. You're aware of this. Kash Patel is going to show up and the Republicans are going to praise him, which, by the way, I think that they should. I would prefer they ask some questions on the finer details, because any of those Republicans can just step in front of a podium with the U.S. Senate seal on it and say, here are the things I like about Kash Patel. Let's get started. You can do that. Democrats can do that too. Kash Patel is a little more likely than RFK to slap back. And we'll get through that entire process and we'll have the exact same thing all the way through and probably for the next couple of years. And right now, Trump is doing a lot with executive orders. I will give this to Congress. I will say one bright, shining thing. Congress is actually putting forward some bills for the first time. It's incredible. I'm still shocked about it. Congress is actually putting as close to single line item bills as we've ever seen before, and actually getting them through the House and the Senate headed towards Trump's desk. That's incredible. I haven't seen that in ages. Neither have you. And that's far better than omnibus nightmare bills that we are going to get to when it comes to reconciling the budget, the debt ceiling, and then, of course, keeping in place Trump's tax reform plan. Now, executive orders can do a whole lot because Congress ceded most of its authority over to federal agencies. And what I'm hoping, whether it's intended or not, and some people say this is a 4D chess maneuver to get in front of the Supreme Court. I don't think so. A lot of people also think that every one of these executive orders is going to end up in front of the Supreme Court that are questionable. I don't think so either, because precedent right now is that executive orders pretty much do whatever they want as long as nobody cries about it too hard, which is, as I pointed out earlier today in some of my writing, why the Democrats are completely lost right now. The Democrats do have a central communication framework for how they talk with each other and for how they promote specific messages. The DNC is very good about this. So are the nonprofits that work with the Democratic Party. They get the messages out, and then those messages are repeated consistently. And Hakeem Jeffries, as well as Chuck Schumer, are usually very good in their offices, are very good at communicating to Democrat senators and Democrat representatives what it is they need to get said. The problem is that right now, Trump is putting through so many executive orders and laws and really good arguments and changing how individuals are paid in the federal government and changing where people can work in the federal government and just straight up canning these awful career bureaucrats that have screwed over Americans, that the Democrats don't really know what to do. They're scrambling. That's why you had Schumer today talking about the people being aroused. No one has any idea what's going on at all. John Fetterman has no idea. Elizabeth Warren has no idea. It's a complete crapshoot for the Democrats. And the clock is ticking because they need to build, as the Democratic Party, a case over the next 20 months as to why Donald Trump and his Congress are what we talked about. They're either doing things that don't matter. That's already been debunked because Americans are very supportive so far of the measures that Trump has put in place, although they have cried about the Gulf of America and the Mount McKinley thing. Either that Republicans are doing things that don't matter, Republicans are doing things that are harmful. They're trying to do that with the Republicans canceling Medicaid, Medicare, whatever stuff that's already being debunked. And then Republicans are just being downright mean, which is where you have, again, Democrat politicians trying to suggest that ICE is driving through the front entrance of an elementary school, throwing any kid that's brown in the back, and then driving off to dump them off a cliff. And so these narratives are discordant with each other because, again, the media's lost all credibility. They were who was supposed to make these things and these criticisms marketable so that you would believe it. And so if the Democrats have this complete disarray, Republicans, if Trump is moving as quickly as he is because his team actually planned a lot of what they were going to do before they got into office, unlike last time, well, then this really is Trump from the top rope, crushing all of these systems that people believed were just going to remain functional forever because they were signed in by Lyndon B. Johnson, or they were signed in by Jimmy Carter, or they were signed in by Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, and they were going to remain in power forever because that's just the way it's been. And you don't want anyone to call you mean or racist or evil, do you? Which is what politicians like Bush were terrified of, both Bushes. That's why first Bush was all about compassionate conservatism. And it was stupid. And this kind of, oh, no, they're going to call me mean and terrible. They're going to call you that anyway. Donald Trump just doesn't care. The people that he's appointed to office don't care. The vast majority of representatives and senators on the right side of the aisle, even the establishment, now don't really care anymore. And as we pointed out with the gubernatorial state of the state address for my home state of Indiana this evening, just as an example for the nation, I guarantee you that Braun's team doesn't care either. No one's subscribing to the Indianapolis Star. They're failing abysmally. They are hemorrhaging staff, subscriptions. There's not really much left there to hemorrhage, I guess, except for the homeless guy sitting outside the door taking a piss. I mean, it really is a wild place to be in, because we might truly reach a point where we actually get some of these deep foundation cracks in the American system of government filled in. Because if the Supreme Court does rule on the exact limit of presidential authority, which they are starting to warm up to because they have no other choice, I mean, yeah, you really are going to see a situation in which the left nor the right can wield things out of power without suffering the consequences for it. And that establishes new norms. The culture then moves in a direction away from the constant drama because it's exhausting. All right, we'll be back tomorrow with what is probably going to be our final core episode of the week. We might have an interview set up for Friday. Heading out to Utah. Might do a little something out there. It's going to be some fun out in the Rockies. A little bit more to share with you on that in the future. Thank you very much for tuning in. It's always a blast to get to spend an evening chatting with you guys. Thank you very much, especially to those who are tuning in on the live streams over on X and on YouTube, because I like seeing the live stream chats and the unhinged messages that constantly scroll across. Thanks very much again. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.